Welcome back. So this portion of the program, we're going to talk about advanced care planning, taking away some of those barriers that we have. We're going to discuss things like durable power of attorney, living wills, and having the start to this conversation. Now, when we talk about advanced directives, we use it as an umbrella term. And this umbrella term oftentimes is like what we talk about dementia. Interesting, Mr. McNeely and I just had this conversation. Dementia is a symptom. It is not a disease. It is a symptom of something that's going on. And we can reverse some of those things, and some of those things we can't. But again, it's an umbrella term, and we put Alzheimer's and all kinds of other diseases in there. When we talk about advanced directives, we also put all of those things underneath it, but there's a lot of reasons why we don't discuss it. So when we talk about why we don't talk about it, fear. My husband and I are perfect examples. I'm going to rat him out. He is not here to defend himself, so there you go. I have my advanced directives done because there are certain things that I don't want done. There are other things that I do want done. My husband will not fill it out because apparently when you fill out your advanced directives, it's like voodoo, it's going to happen. So he's going to have a problem. But he says to me, but you know what I want. Yes, I know what you want, but what if I'm in the car with you? Who's going to speak for you then? Because the kids don't know what you want, and they are going to have all kinds of emotions that are going on, and they're going to have to try to make decisions when they're in that emotional state. And that's not the time to make emotional decisions. That's when we make a whole bunch of mistakes. So what we look at is that really 2 out of every 5 individuals have considered what they want to have done. And that means that there are even more that are not. So when we fill out these advance directives, there is a reason for it. To me, that reason says, I love you. I don't want you to have to go through all this. I don't want to go through this, but I love you. And that's what it says to me. But when we're unsure of the choices, that's where we have to have some education. That's why when we have a diagnosis that comes along, we need to know what the prognosis is. How are we going to handle this disease? How is it going to look in the future? So there's a big difference between diagnosis and prognosis. Some diagnoses you can live for a very long time. Other ones, we have to make some decisions to be prepared, to prepare for our loved ones. So when you think about advanced care planning, what do you see? When you look at some of these papers, this is what you see. This is Michigan Patient Advocate Designation. This is a different form, but this form you're going to put on here that you just decided you didn't want to sign it, or you do. You can register with michigan.gov. In Ohio, your paper looks like this. You can pull these forms off of the internet. Fill them out in your own home, because what a lot of people see is a whole bunch of legal gobbledygook. And it's frightening, it's scary. What if I put this on there? What if I can't reverse it? You can. You can always reverse it. What do people think? Well, like my husband, they think that it's going to happen, that it's a binding instrument, or they oftentimes think that it's unaffordable. If you can afford the paper to print this document out on and an ink pen, you got it made. It's covered. The only thing that you have to have are 2 witnesses. And you have to have a person, if you decide that you're going to have this young man take care of your medical decisions, he has to be willing to do it. And he has to sign a paper that says, yes, I'm willing to do that. There are certain individuals who cannot be witnesses for these documents, and the reason that they can't is they might benefit from your death. And so that's a legal requirement. You can't have. Now, I have actually chased people down in the hospital. They probably thought I was some weird stalker, because I would say, I know you don't know me, but could you come witness a signature? And they go, well, I don't know this person. And I said, that's fine. All you have to do is witness that they are signing this paper. And I make sure that they see that the information is correct, that it is this individual, so a license or something. And then we go ahead and sign the paper, and voila, life is good. Now, I oftentimes, if I did something like that, I would ask, do you mind if I at least get your telephone number in case there is any repercussion? Some family can contest this, and families do. A lot of times families will contest it because they haven't been involved with the conversation. Maybe they haven't been involved with their loved one for an extended period of time. And now this comes as a big shock to them because they're the firstborn, and yet you've got Joe Schmo over here who is going to be making those decisions for you. Well, if you haven't talked to your child in 15 years, do they really know you anymore? So there are a lot of different confusing things that can go on with this. But again, some of the barriers that we face even with this is looking at these papers and going, wow, this is pretty intense stuff. In the one for Ohio, it's considered a power of attorney and a living will declaration. These are considered legal documents. In 47 states, the courts will look at these and say, yep, this is what they wanted. So you don't have to have the expense of going to an attorney and paying $5,000. And there's probably attorneys that are going, what is her deal? She's taken away our business. But throughout this whole document, you have all kinds of information in here explaining everything that's in it. The other thing that's in here is you have a registry form for organ donation. So if you want to have your organs harvested after death, you can certainly do that. You can also tell them what organs you want to have harvested and which ones you want to go to the grave with. So, in fact, a friend of mine just recently found out that they got the kidney of a 12-year-old girl who was involved in a terrible accident and died. And he's living well now because he has her kidney. And the parents, it is a tragic accident, but the parents said, let's have others survive as a result of this. So it was wonderful to be able to do that. So if you go online, you can go to the Ohio State Bar Association, or you can go to ohio.gov, whatever your particular state is. So you can actually do this in any state. So Michigan and Ohio are not the only ones. They do have a little different requirements in some of them, but you can do this, and it's perfectly, perfectly legal. The other thing is what it means to families. There's a fundamental reason that we're living in this era where we have all of this modern medicine, but what do we want? How do we see our lives, and what is that impact going to be for our families? When we choose not to talk, I have had a lot of very emotional meetings with families, with patients, who have never had the discussion with families, and now we're having a cry fest. And I cry right along with them because it's very, very difficult to go through these things. Remember Doug, who didn't even want to be hugged because nobody wanted to touch him. When I put a person in hospice services, one of the requirements, and it is in these documents as well, is you have the option of having a DNR, which is do not resuscitate, do DNI, which is do not intubate. But I have to explain to people what it means when you choose not to do this. It's called informed consent. So I'm putting someone on hospice services, or I'm talking to them about putting together their advance directives, and they go, well, I don't know. I don't want to sign this paper. Now, the daughter was the mother's legal guardian. Mother had dementia, had Alzheimer's disease. And so she said, I don't want to sign that do not resuscitate order. She says, I just don't feel that that would be right. I would be killing my mother. And I said, that's fine. You don't have to sign it. But let me tell you, because I believe in informed consent, if you're going to sign papers, you better know what you're signing or what you're reclusing yourself from. And that is that if we do DNR, or we don't do DNR, I'm sorry, and we wind up doing CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, we are going to break bones. So we're going to press in that sternal bone, we're going to break those rib bones. And there is a risk of puncture of the heart or the lung. It is not going to change her disease process, and it will make recovery very difficult. But that's informed consent. Not all people will tell you that, but that is what happens with CPR. The daughter tearfully said, I'm going to go ahead and sign the paper. And as she signed the paper, she said, I just killed my mother, didn't I? And I said, no, the disease is killing your mother. You are showing her compassion. But again, if we don't talk about it, how do we know? I want to tell you a real live situation that happens when we don't have these discussions. Some of you will remember the name quite readily, Terri Schiavo. I see a lot of heads nodding. I did some research on this whole thing with Terri Schiavo because it was so shocking to us as a people, as a nation, and I think globally it impacted us. But Terri Schiavo was 26 years old when she had a seizure. She had a hypoxic encephalopathy, which simply means, it's a great big word for nurses, it just means the oxygen was not getting to her brain. She was not brain dead, she was brain damaged. Now, her history was apparently that she had bulimia. Her husband had not been told that she had bulimia, and they believe that that was one of the reasons that she had the situation, because she was low on potassium and it did impact her heart and everything. So her husband sued the doctor, and they received $750,000 for her care. Terri lived in a skilled nursing facility for an extended period of time, and she had to have a feeding tube because she couldn't swallow well. And it was easy to see that Terri was not going to recover from this. At 26 years of age, you can only imagine the impact that it had on her young husband as well. He went to the court and he said, Terri told me that she would not want to live this way, and I want to discontinue her feeding tube. The court agreed with him, even though there was nothing in writing. So he spoke for her. And they discontinued her feeding tube. She had no food, no water for 2.5 days. Her parents intervened. They appealed to the court, and she wound up having the feeding tube reinstated. Now, we know how we feel after just 24 hours of fasting. Imagine 2.5 days with no food and no water and no ability to tell you that she was uncomfortable. So it got reinstated. About 2 years later, he petitioned the court, and this time the feeding tube was disconnected, and she was 5 days without food or water. After that, the parents again appealed and won the appeal, and they wanted to take over guardianship of their daughter. That was not to be. A few years later, on March 31st, 2005, Terri died again because this was a 7-year court battle of what she wanted according to her husband, but nothing was in writing. The court agreed with her husband one more time. They removed the feeding tube, and gave another order, and that was nothing by mouth. No ice chips, nothing. And the parents were banned from the bedside because they were doing everything they could to intervene for their daughter. That particular time, it took 13 and a half days for Terry to die. So what does that kind of death look like? Because the body is composed of 60% water. Every single cell in our body has to have it. Think about how you feel when you're fasting and you have had no water for 24 hours. A lot of people get a little bit nauseated, headaches, etc. But that's how she died. The average person can live approximately 3 to 4 days if they're in a situation like that where they're a little bit compromised. She managed to live 13 and a half days. Her body was healthy. But that was the outcome for not having things in writing. And we think about, well, you know, we're approaching the end of life, and that's the time to do it. It's time way before that. A 31-year-old woman who has 3 children that drives to work every day has to make provisions for their children. And if nothing's in writing, who gets the kids? Unfortunately, in her case, it was going to be her husband, who was an abusive man. So the court was going to have to intervene in that whole thing. We need to have conversations. Please, please, please have the conversations. It is so important. And it can put the physicians in a terrible bind as well, because you have X number of children that are in there, and daughter A wants to have nothing done because this is what mom or dad would want. Daughter B is very compassionate, and this is an emotional thing for her. And so now she's saying, no, mom wanted this, mom wanted that. Then son C steps in and says, wait a minute, what about the finances? All of these things are things that we have to consider, and these are things that you can do in the privacy of your own home with your family, having the discussions. The discussions are not easy to get into, but we really should get in them. There are lots of different ways that we can do that. If you know that you're going to have a conversation, you're going to try to have this conversation, there are so many resources that are available. This one is by the American Hospital Association, AHA.org. Put it in writing, questions and answers about advance directives. This wonderful book, the church could actually have this printed up with UCG credentials and everything on it. It's 5 wishes. It talks about who's going to make decisions, what kind of medical care I want or don't want, how comfortable do I want to be. Believe it or not, there are some people that are struggling with a very painful disease that don't want morphine because they're afraid of morphine. And that's, again, where we have to step in and provide education. But how do I want people to treat me? Not only while I'm going through this, but after I'm dead. How do I want them to take care of my body? Most people are going to say, it's okay, do whatever you want, I'm not going to know. But what do I want my loved ones to know? And that are things that we can put in these documents as well. The other thing is your conversation starter kit. This is something you can get offline. And this is a great resource tool, whether you're a minister, a nurse, or a CNA. CNA is a certified nursing assistant. Say, the nurse in me again. But this talks about how to get everything started to have these conversations. There's other things that we can do. This is one of the things that we utilize in hospice quite regularly. This is a memory journal. This is something we should be doing right now anyway. This goes through, how did I meet your mom? How did my parents meet? What was my favorite color? My favorite dance? My favorite food? What's my favorite memory? What do I want people to know that I've kind of kept hidden? It goes through medical history. It goes through love stories, lots of different things. And this can actually help get the conversation started. Every one of us in the church should have a little book like this and have this not only because we're all going to die, but what kind of history do we hand down to our children? I've gotten pretty involved with the ancestry, and that's actually kind of fun. I was afraid to find out where I came from, but they're apparently not bad people, except I do have a couple of Mormon priests. One guy had 9 wives and 31 children. It's making it real difficult to do my ancestry. But the other thing, emergency providers, let's talk about them for a minute. You collapse, you go to the hospital. Do they know what you want? Because every time you sign a document when you're in the hospital, and most of us do this, we sign all kinds of different papers when we go into the hospital, but when we leave the hospital, when we're discharged, those papers are no good. It's called an in-hospital DNR. But we need to have something outside the hospital. For me, if I had a DNR, which I don't have a DNR, I do have my advanced directives, but not a DNR, because I don't know yet. I have not made up my mind. But if you have something like that, it should be copied and folded and put in your wallet. It should be put in your glove box of your car. Your relatives should have a copy of this because you just never know. It's very important because emergency providers, their job is to save your life. And that takes me back to something that was actually kind of interesting, the Good Samaritan law. You know how that actually got started is because globally now, it's an ethical decision. We see an older person laying on the sidewalk, and we go over there, and naturally the thing that we want to do is try to help them. And so people would provide CPR. And they had to provide protection for people who were trying to help somebody because you didn't know if that person was a DNR or not. And sometimes they would sue you, thinking that their broken bones were because of you, not because of the fall. So it was very interesting how we've changed things. We've turned it into a very legal process as well. But, so we're talking about the advanced directives. Advanced care planning should be a process. It should not be an event. It should be a process that we can start now and making sure that we're looking at the medical future. Again, most of us are not going to die suddenly. We're going to die over a period of time. We got time to think about it. But we need to think about it and help our families because it's really quite foolish if we ignore this reality. So some of the points that I've already discussed a little bit here, the laws will vary in state to state, but again, most of the time, the courts are going to honor those papers if they're recent. Now, here's the thing. If you decide that you want to change your mind, go ahead. Print out new documents, have them witnessed by somebody else. You don't always have to have them notarized. I am a notary, so I go ahead and notarize them for people. It's not a witnessing signature, it's that I've notarized this, that they have had this done. But it's not really necessary either. It just makes them feel better sometimes. But you can change that. Just discard, throw away, destroy the other one, and you have new dates on this one. So you can update it however you want. If your beliefs change, if your health changes, if the people who was your advocate is no longer your friend, you can delete them and put somebody else in there. And you can actually put 2 people in there. This one first, and if they're not available, use this one down here. So it's a really great document. The other thing with these documents is you can register them. In Michigan, I know you can, and I believe in Ohio you can as well. You can register them on the .gov websites, which is kind of neat. The other thing that we have is the physician order for scope of treatment, or POST. And that's a new one that's coming out. So we'll talk about that real quick because There are, remember I mentioned the DNR, the DNI, the do not resuscitate, do not intubate, and the VSED. And that one is the voluntary cessation of eating and drinking. There are people who will stop eating and drinking to hasten their death. And if they know that they are going to be in that situation, it's actually a very peaceful death because they have less pain, they have less secretions, and after about 3 days, they go into a state of euphoria. And so your natural endorphins are kicking in, and it's helping your body respond to what's happening with the loss of food and water. But the problem is you get a little bit thirsty, and so I'll just take a sip. And that is going to prolong the situation. But most people, when they execute this particular document, within 3 to 10 days, they pass away. But it's a voluntary thing, and you can actually put that in your advance directives as well. And it's a legal thing. So one of the things that we need to do, though, is we need to educate ourselves about what these particular papers are. Who can sign them and who can't. And all of them have really good descriptions of everything that's in there. And having the conversation, again, there are great resources that we have. There's lots of different things. The other thing that is available, which is actually, this is kind of cool. This is a little deck of cards, and it's called Go Wish. And when you have somebody who is advancing toward the end of life, this is really a great way. If you don't know how to open up and have that conversation, you can just say, you know, I'm trying to figure out what was important to me, and I got this deck of cards. And I thought that one of the things that was important to me was to have an advocate who knew what my values and priorities were. How does that sit with you? You know, can you help me with some of these things? And it's a great conversation starter. They will have cards in here to have my funeral arrangements made, to be able to talk about what death means. There's a lot of wonderful things, and you just have them pick out 10. It creates a desire to talk about some of these things that we whisper about, and we need to be quite open with them. One of the cards in here is to be at peace with God. So there's lots of different ways that we can have this discussion, and we should have this discussion, but this is a great door opener for it. Now, when we talk about this, living wills, this is quite similar, but the difference between a living will and an advance directive is that living will is very direct. It's about life only. The other documents can actually, you can put in things like, I want so-and-so to have my table. So you can actually put some of your other wishes in that. But this is particularly about treatments that you do or do not want. So a living will is a little bit different. It is a little bit more binding in that way. The power of attorney of healthcare or financial, honestly, you have to be in sound mind to sign any of these documents because otherwise it will be contested. Persons that have early stages in dementia can actually sign this. And when I say dementia, I'm encompassing all the diseases. Memory loss is what dementia means. But as we know, in the early stages of this disease process, the memory can come and go. You can sign this document if you are in that place of good and have witnesses there. It is advisable that if you're going to have healthcare and financial power of attorneys, make them 2 different people. Because one child might be really good at making those medical care decisions. The other person might be really good at financial. So it's always a good idea to split those 2 up. The DNR, DNI, again, we've already talked about this, but when we talk about intubation, we're talking about no fluids, no IVs. And if you're dying Actually, you don't want more fluids because your body's not able to process them. It is not assisted suicide. If I sign this, it's because I'm getting ready to go and I want you to help me do it. No, that's not the way this works. It is not assisted suicide. This is just what you want. And so it really is a very loving document, because when you're faced with that decision, and it's an emotional decision, we are not dealing with logic sometimes. My grandmother had to go through this. My grandfather had 2 heart attacks in an hour and a half. He was a do not resuscitate. My grandmother had very early stage Alzheimer's disease. When they went to the ER, because she called the ER, even though Grandpa was a do not resuscitate, they went to the ER and her Alzheimer's was missed. It was taken as stress. And she signed documents at the hospital to rescind his DNR and had surgery. My grandfather lived for 31 days on life support, and he died. So again, it's really good to talk about these kinds of things, but we have to really know who is going to be speaking for us. Again, with that, you can also put other comfort provisions in there. I want soft music played. I want soft lighting. Whatever it is you want, make it specific to you. Now, this is something that, unfortunately, Ohio does not yet have. It was just actually put into law up in Michigan, and we still don't even have the form. That makes good sense. You have the government at work. But the POLST form, physician order for scope of treatment, I think that eventually the POLST is going to replace the DNR, because you can actually have your DNR wishes put on this. Again, you can put this on government websites. The nice thing about the POST is that it can go on a registry, and you can be traveling from Florida to Michigan and have a problem, and the EMTs, the emergency technicians, can access your data. If they know that you have a POST form, they can actually get it, because it's there, it's accessible. And I think that's a really, really great thing. This is not going to be for your average 31-year-old driving to work. This is going to be for somebody who has a disease process that is going to probably be terminal, or they're very, very frail. And so this is what you would want. It goes where you go. If you're at home and you get transferred to a hospital, it goes with you. If you are in a skilled nursing facility, it goes with you to the hospital. So it's not something that you have to redo all the time. This is a really good document. I do have only one copy of this, but it talks about the POST form, the physician order for scope of treatment. In Michigan, it's called MyPost. And there's also a POLST, the physician order for life-sustaining treatment. So there's various acronyms that they use, but it's basically the same thing. It is also designed to be a shared decision-making process. You're going to go through this form and talk to people, and it is going to be witnessed. So that's that. So again, when we think about our future, we're thinking about their future. It does show love for them. We have to be considerate of those that are going to be the ones left standing. When I'm taking care of a person and they're at end of life and they are actively dying, I want to know everything I can about this family, because when they take their final breath, I need to be able to turn and minister to these people who are going to be struggling. Not everybody understands what's going on at the time of death, and it's very, very awkward for everybody. But again, all of these papers too, you can actually change if you choose to. So when should it start? Again, it should start at the time of diagnosis. Mrs. Jones, I am sorry to tell you, but you have fill in the blank. That's when it should happen, because we should say, you have this disease process, let's talk about the prognosis, and there may come a time when we should discuss 2 other options, palliative care and hospice care. Get it out there, But we avoid saying those things, and it's not fair to them, and it's not fair to their loved ones. It's great for the doctor because he doesn't have to do that. Now, I had an arrangement with a physician up in the Flint area, and it actually just blew my mind that he was receptive to it. And that was, I walked into his room, his waiting room, and I don't know if it's from being in hospice for so many years, I don't know, but you know, it was like when I was looking to become a phlebotomist, I would look at people's veins. You know, I'd go through the story, they thought I was some kind of ghoul. But I would also, when I walk into this gentleman's waiting room, I could see all these people and I'm going, oh, that one is so sick. That one needs to be on hospice services. And you can sometimes just tell that, and it's really sad. But I asked him, I said, you know, I know you can't get involved with a HIPAA thing, and I have no reason to know this person's name or what their disease process is, but have you considered talking to them about palliative or hospice care? Oh, no. He says, you know, they lose confidence in me. And I thought, wow. So I suggested, would you be willing to consider this idea? If I go into your office when you call me, maybe once a week, and do a little lecture for certain individuals, I said, I will take off my badge. I don't sell any hospice service, any particular company, although I do think Heart's great. But I don't sell a particular company. I sell a particular service, and it's one that we need. And so I said, would you be willing, if I were willing to come in and do that? I'll take off my badge, and I will talk to them about treatment options, palliative care, and hospice care. And he thought it was great. And it was exciting to be able to go in and talk to these individuals and help them. And he didn't have to do it. I was willing to do that because we have to have those conversations. But these are the things that we have to know. What do you want to know about the medical condition? Some people don't want to know anything. They're in shock. But then other people will want to know everything. And you know, we have a lot of people that have been educated to the level of PhD on Google, which is not good. Trust me, it makes my life harder. How can we help you live well? What are the goals that you have in life? How can we achieve some of those goals? It's not always about, well, let's get this done before you die. It's how about, let's get this done. How can we improve the quality of your spiritual care, your mental care, all of this, by just getting some things done? We always put it off. My husband and I had a file. See, my husband's going to hate this. But we had a file, and it's called Someday. And in that Someday file, we would put in where we were going to go for vacations, different things that we wanted to do. And I got disgusted because after 30 years, we still were adding to it, but we weren't taking anything out of it. And I threw away the file. And he was upset with me. But I don't want to go to Someday aisle anymore. Let's do the thing. What do you want for your family? How do you prepare for that? Even Jesus prepared for his mother. And how can we make this time meaningful? We can only answer those questions if we know what they're looking forward to. And we only know that if we ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Sometimes people need that. They need that encouragement to talk about what nobody wants to talk about. I had a disease called psittacosis. Not a good disease, trust me. I was one of 5 people in 30 years that lived. Was not a good thing. But I even thought about some of these things. What do I want? Apparently God was not ready for my spirit to come back because I'm still here. But there were things that I was able to do. Like having that experience of being so sick, I knew that somewhere along the line, I was going to be a nurse. And it took until I was 48 years old to even go to nursing school, but I did it. How can we get better at discussing at this? Normalize it. Talk about it with the kids. you know, Grandma's really getting older, and she's not going to be with us for a long period of time. What are some of the things you'd like to know about Grandma before she dies? So Grandma could actually help by putting some of that stuff down in a memory journal. We can talk about it with children. They're far more savvy than what we think. When we're having these discussions, I put this up here. Don't say, I know how you feel. I lost a little boy at 6.5 months. And people would say to me, oh, I know how you feel. Really, you delivered a child that didn't live? Oh, no. Then you don't know how they feel. It's a very personal thing, so we have to be careful with what we say. I can't imagine what that might be like. We can empathize with them, and that's what we need, is some empathy. One of your other handouts that you have is talking about you have it, I don't. But it's talking about how to have these conversations, how to open up some of those things, because that really is something that we have to be mindful of. If we aren't mindful with our words, we're going to shut people right down. So you do have helpful comments in speaking with the bereaved, but these things actually can apply to somebody that you're talking about when they are struggling with this disease process. I can't imagine what it would be like to be diagnosed with cancer. It must be very frightening. Have you thought about what treatment options you're looking at? And cry with them. It's okay, because they need to know that you care. One of the other things is exploring their fears. For me, I explored a lot of fears of people who unfortunately did not have the spiritual understanding that we have. And I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of getting dead. That's the hard part. And it's what happens, again, from birth to death that is going to make the difference. But you have to know, how do they feel about it? So we talked a lot about what they believed, what was going to happen to them. It was amazing to me the number of people who were going to go to heaven. Everything was going to be cool. But these conversations are going to sustain them. It's going to help them through it. And it is amazing when you have them. So look at explorable, livable options. When we talk about livable options, what does that mean? Well, what are they looking at? What do they want to have done? Again, these are different things that are going to be important to them. And a lot of times, right at diagnosis is very important to talk to someone. And I don't know how you feel, but I'm here. You want to talk about anything, I'm here. And sometimes just I'm here can be beautiful, but be there. Be sincere about it. If you're going to say that you're going to be there to support them, be there to support them. Don't beat around the bush. Talk about it. Be open about it. Because this is where you're going to have true, open, deep communication. And we do have to educate other people as well. Because not everybody's comfortable having that discussion. They're going to be a little bit leery about having it, because I don't want to hurt their feelings. And again, as I said to you earlier, they just stop coming around. And it's their protection defense for themselves. Help them to identify what they can control and what they can't. You are not going to be able to control those that will not come and talk to you. You are not going to be able to control those that are going to come and talk to you and be disingenuous. But what you can do is, if you've got someone that comes to you and says, well, have you thought about what you're going to do with your fishing boat? You might not want to have that discussion. But there are things that they can't control. They can't control this disease, but they can control other things around it. What can we give them to give them some peace? There was a lady that I thought was really cool. Talking about hospice again. But this lady went on hospice services. She decided she did not want to continue dialysis. And when you stop dialysis, your body instantly begins to shut down. And it doesn't take very long after stopping dialysis that the person will die. But she was an older lady, and she says, I'm ready. I've had enough of this. I just don't want to deal with this anymore. So she went off dialysis and went on hospice services. Then she found out that her great-granddaughter was going to have a baby. So she said, wait a minute, time out. Take me off hospice services. I want to go back on dialysis, and I'm hoping that I will be here when that little one arrives. And that happened. She was several months out, and she was doing great. The baby was born. It was a healthy baby. She enjoyed seeing her great-grandchild. And she started having other physical problems because along with dialysis, you oftentimes have some cardiac issues. And she was starting to have more and more. And she said, okay, I've seen my baby, and I'm happy with where things are, so I'm going to go off dialysis. And she put her back on hospice, and 10 days later, she was gone. But that's what we can control and what we can't. But we don't know what we control and what we can't if we don't have discussions. And sometimes they're medical discussions. So I already went through all of these wonderful things, but there's another site, agingwithdignity.org is a wonderful site. There are a lot of beautiful things that we can do for our people just by having these beautiful conversations. So you can go through all of these things, but remember, it is really important to have that conversation. What is the status quo? Are you keeping the status quo? Do you want to have things different? How do you want them to be different? Be generous with your words. Also, have respect. Have integrity when you're having this conversation. And always tell the truth. Don't mince words. Sometimes that's the hardest thing because people don't really want to say, yes, I know that they said you're going to die. And when we say the die word, the dead word, that's where we have a lot of difficulty because it's final. I never said to a family, your loved one has passed. Passed what? Your loved one has died. I'm sorry. And that's okay. We understand that. It's the end. But don't mince words. There are several rules that I look at, and I think one of the ones that I learned very quickly, leave your credentials at the door. Just because you know what's going to happen with this person medically, I'm speaking as a nurse now, doesn't mean that you have to tell everything. And I made that mistake early in my career because I believed in being truthful. I believed in giving information. But you know, sometimes you can give the wrong information. Sometimes you can only get the right information into your head when you're listening to what's coming out of theirs. And that means leaving your credentials at the door. Whether you're a nurse or a doctor or a minister. I did try to consult with a minister about something that was really bothering me, something I was struggling with in my spiritual life. And all I got was this and this and this. These are hard and fast rules, but he wasn't listening to a thing I was saying. I was trying to explain my rationale and explore it, but I never got to do that. And so we didn't have that discussion. And it was probably 3 years before I came to my own conclusion. Leave your credentials at the door. We're not there to save their souls. We're there to hear them. And sometimes that'll be the result. You'll have somebody that makes a deeper commitment. But leave your credentials. Always look at them. Don't look away. Even if you're crying, it's okay. But keep that eye contact. It's very important. Because if you're talking to me about, the dying process and I'm doing this, how are we connecting? Or put the phone down. Oh my goodness, put the phone down. But be attentive and be relaxed. It's okay. Are you always going to say the right thing? No. But if you don't say something, you're not saying the right thing at all. Sometimes you do have to listen, though. And keeping an open mind. You may not agree with everything that they came up with, but it's them. And then listen to their words. But don't just listen to their words. When you're listening to their words, you're putting a picture with it about how they're feeling. But look at them. What is their nonverbal communication saying to you? If they're withdrawn or they're putting their head down, obviously they're not as open to this conversation. What is their body language saying? Sometimes, and I teach this all the time with my dementia classes, that when we're looking at this individual and they're acting out in some way, what is their body language saying to you? If you were really angry, how would you respond if you couldn't use words? If you were really sad, how would you respond to others if you couldn't use words? So that's why I say you have to listen to their words, but listen to more of what they're not saying, because that can make a big difference. Interrupting and imposing your solutions. You might have the right answer, but maybe they're not ready for that answer right now. Maybe like myself, they just need to talk things through a little bit to come to that conclusion in their own head. There's that saying that says, a man that convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So if we're imposing our solutions or our, solutions, we're not listening to what they're really saying. And we're not letting them explain themselves. If you need to clarify something, paraphrase it back to them. What I'm hearing is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm hearing that you're pretty afraid about what's going to happen to your family. Is that correct? Let them tell you what's going on, because, again, that opens the door to even more conversation. Make sure we ask those questions and try to feel what they're feeling. Again, that body language is going to come back. Give them feedback. And then, like I already said, pay attention to that body language. It's very important. What we say is 7%. It's what we don't say that speaks the loudest. And sometimes we have to combine those two because we have to say something. But many, many times it's what we don't say that will help open the door to talking more. Does that make sense? So what not to say? You're so strong. I'm not strong, I'm scared. I'm not strong, I don't want to go through this, I'm angry. It's going to be okay. Oh, really? I've got this thing growing in my body that they can't take out. How is that going to be okay? At least he or she, now they've died. At least he or she isn't suffering anymore. But you're suffering. When we think about that, we have to think about the fact that these people are suffering. Not the person who died, but the people who are left standing. We have to consider them in this as well. Everything happens for a reason. Oh, really? Why did my baby die? I don't understand that. Why did my friend have cancer? Why did this person live and not that one? That person was a very, very bad person. This one's a really good person, and they died. Explain that to me. Ultimately, some of the things that we say, like it's God's plan, can actually terrify people and pull them away from God. When I lost my son, people said a lot of these same things to me. And I was dying inside. You look so nice, really? Yes, my belly is gone, but guess what else? I don't have anything in my arms. And I remember, and this is horrible to even admit, but I'll admit it to you because you'll forgive me, right? I saw a pregnant woman on the street, and I hated her. She looked so happy, so radiant, and I hated her. I didn't even know her. So I called my doctor, and I said, I think you need to have me committed, because I saw this person, and it was unnatural how I felt toward her. And he says, oh, you're just going through the grief process. Really? How come I wasn't prepared for this? Because they knew I was going to probably lose my child, but nobody ever talked to me about it. So I was not prepared when that child died. Even my husband didn't talk to me about it. It was a pregnancy, it wasn't a baby. In my body, it moved. It was my child. What healed me was actually, he called me into the office because apparently he thought I did need to be committed, and I wouldn't have blamed him. But he gave me the pathology report, and I read everything that happened and why my son didn't live. And that was healing for me. We have to talk about real things. Everybody was patronizing me, and we do that a lot with people who are dying or with families who are surviving the death. Don't patronize people. Talk to them openly. When I looked at this, I debated about putting this particular slide in, but even Jesus died. And we know that he was dying a death that he knew was going to be horrible. But even Jesus prepared for his mother, his earthly mother. Woman, behold your son. Behold your mother. He made provisions, and that very day, Mary became a part of John's household. She was going to be cared for. He made provisions for his mother. All of these papers can help to make provisions for our family. And that's why it's so important. Whether Jesus or Terry Schiavo, how do you want it to be? We need to have these discussions. It is vital. And don't be afraid that you're going to say the wrong thing. You probably will at some point. But if you don't put it out there, some people are suffering in silence, not having these discussions. And then the families suffer later when they have to make decisions and they don't know what you wanted. Now it's an emotional upset for them. So that's all I have for that one. Does anybody have any questions? I knew you would. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just have to mess with people. They said be comfortable. I am.
I appreciate that the slide, what not to say. I wonder if you could comment, Andi, on well-meaning people who have a pet treatment that they are ready to offer to someone dealing with Alzheimer's or cancer, especially home remedies, essential oils. You referenced essential oils.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, these things make the rounds. A natural treatment, this or that it worked and worked for me and it'll work for you. I had a recent member that was dealing with something, and a member came and offered all of this, and he listened patiently, but then he said, no, I'm going to stay on my meds. And
Mm-hmm.
it may have worked for you, but we offer these things and it's not our business. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. A lot of times we have well-intended people. And I think that if we try to help those that are struggling with some of these people coming up, it isn't because they don't care or because they're in a multi-level marketing and they want to sell you something. It's because they care. And there are things that we can't explain, some things that do work for some individuals and not for others, but it's a very personal choice. Don't be offended if they don't want to try it. Don't say, you know, that sounds like snake oil to me. Just, you know, thank you for your care. Thank you for caring enough to bring this to my attention. I might look into it, but right now I'm happy with the treatment that I'm currently under. And I guess that would be the only thing, you know, we can't take offense if they don't want to do what we bring to them. But we also have to be careful what we bring to them. Because like this gal that talked to me about essential oils and Alzheimer's disease, do you realize how famous that person would be if they were able to cure Alzheimer's disease with essential oils? Now, God gave us a lot of things, herbs and oils and everything for our health, but we also have disease that's just going to not respond to some of those things. And again, you know, don't be offended if they bring it. And don't be offended if you find out that they had something and they didn't bring it to you. Maybe they're just afraid to bring up the subject. So, but there are a lot of people that will have, well, you know, this happened to Michael Joe, and, you know, this is what we used, and he's, you know, 9,000 years old now. It's great. Yes, sir.
My wife and I both have living wills, but can you still fill out a post as well?
When it's yes, you can. They're going to have to correspond with one another. And again, you don't have the post in Ohio yet. They are working on that. But I think it's going to be a great document. Just when you do that, if you have both of them, they have to correspond. Because otherwise, it's going to offer a lot of contention in the courts. Okay. All right, our last session, I'm going to be discussing the dying process and what we need to know when we're with a family during that dying process, but also afterward. And we've touched on some of that, but we'll hit it a little bit harder when we come back.